Cool.
You should be there broadcasting. Whomever's dinger that was extremely loud. We can mute that, please. It'd be awesome.
I'm on it.
Texting me.
That was Kate Wendell. What's up, Tanner?
What's up, man?
We've like messaged or like we've commented on each other's Facebook posts and stuff, but we've never met each other. This is cool.
No, first time for everything.
Yeah, for sure. What is going on? I've decided to evolve the title again. We've actually made it an entire week. The last Monday's title was Keep Mondays Weird, and so this week's title is a title involving the word weird. I hope you guys are cool with that, because that's what we went with. We are currently live on the book right now.
Excellent.
And yeah, like, who wants to start? What do you guys want to talk about? I have no idea what's going on today.
So I have a great story that I think will set the the context for this. All right, so my wife Kate, she doesn't cook a lot, but when she does cook, she cooks a few key things, and one of those things is a pot roast that she likes to make, and it's delicious. It's good pot roast, and I probably shouldn't like peek behind the hood of the secret recipe, right? But I'm just curious, and so I was in the kitchen with her when she was making it. Crock pot, big pot roast, pretty standard setup, right? Peas, carrots, potatoes, all the things you throw in there. And I saw her sawing the ends off of the pot roast. She cut both ends of the pot roast off, and like the raw pot roast, and then put it in the crock pot and then put all the other stuff in there. And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. Tastes fine. And I was like, hey, why did you just cut the ends off the pot roast and then throw those away and then put the rest of the roast in the crock pot? And she's like, well, that's my mom's secret recipe. And I'm like, all right, cool. Whatever the case, right? We'll check with Joan. So then the next holiday we were together, and I was like, Joan, I have to know, like, why do you cut the ends off of the roast before you put it in the crock pot? And she's like, oh, well, that's what my mom used to do. And I'm like, oh, okay. So another holiday, right? Grandma's there. And I'm like, hey, okay, we got to solve this, right? Like, why are we wasting the roast? And so we sat down and talked about it. Great. Here's the spices. I was like, but why do you cut the ends off of the roast? And she's like, oh, well, honey, we didn't used to have a crock pot that we could fit the whole roast in. So we had to cut the ends off. And I was like, oh, are you kidding me? Right. So for 3 generations, we've now been cutting the ends off of the roast because it didn't used to fit in the crock pot because the crock pot was smaller, right? And so it just made me think this story may be somewhat true or all true or not true at all, but nonetheless, it's a metaphor, right, that made me think about how influential our past 3 or 4 generations have been. And the fact that, like, the people that influence the programs that are running our lives today lived like 100 years ago, right? Think how much has changed in 100 years, but a lot of us are still cutting the ends off of the pot roast because that's the secret recipe that was handed down from grandma to mom to whatever. So that's what I'm about. That's what I've been thinking a lot about recently, is like, what are the 100-year-old secret recipes that maybe seem like they taste delicious, but are not entirely necessary in a 2019 society. It's my story.
Tanner, welcome. I love you, dude. I appreciate you being here. I've been having this like exact conversation about the generational stuff that's been passed down like all week long. And
yeah.
So I love how this stuff, it's like whenever, like Darren was here last week, Dustin and I do this every week. It's always like the perfect time for stuff.
Of course.
And I was having this conversation yesterday with actually my D&D group, because I'm a fucking nerd. That's right. Anyways, we were just talking about like the stuff that's passed down. But I mean, but like cutting the pot roast is like, imagine like the stuff that we've just been doing. Oh, well, that's just the way. I was in the Navy for 20 years and there was so much stuff. Oh, that's just the way we've always done it. That's just the way we've always done it. This procedure's just been this way for blah, 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 blah. Even though this is like 8 iterations of the sonar system or the nuclear reactor or the submarine or whatever. Like, oh, it's just how we've always done it. And because I think, I don't know, it's like the fear of change versus the fear of like, hey, let's have some pain for a day or two while we figure out a better way. Like, they're in strong competition of each other. And it's like, I don't know, man. I could just sit here and ponder this freaking thought as well for hours.
Other gentlemen, what's your
what do you guys think? Justin's like just chilling. He's just gonna think about it.
I like listening, man. It was a nice story, and I think what what Ryan added was a kind of bring it into some more. So what I connect all that confusion to is our comfort-seeking behavior, and how seeking comfort, whether it's cutting the ends off a pot roast because it's comfortable, or just not venturing out on our own to create our own thought, or maybe just find someone else's thought that we can incorporate into our own thinking that's outside of our own, and like not being progressively active at consciously looking outwards all the time, being trapped in our comfortable way of thinking that this ego knows everything and can perceive everything with enough accuracy to make lifelong decisions. This is kind of unusual, right? To think such an arrogant thought. However, it's comfortable to think that way. So hiding behind that, cutting the ends of the pot roast, and not allowing my mind to think, why do that?
Yeah, and I think the so the flip side of that, right, is if you put the whole pot roast in, to stick with that analogy, imagine grandma's reaction. You must cut the ends off the pot roast, right? I mean, I've experienced that in my own life when taking a different path and stepping out is sort of like blasphemy, right? Like how could there be another way? And there's almost a level of, at least in my experience, there was a level of conflict, I guess, within the family, as though the previous generations taught me wrong, and that by me doing something different was sort of, it was a wrong versus a right. And my wife and I actually talked about this just recently, about why people stay stuck in those type of patterns, and I think a lot of it is it's a fear-driven reaction to stay alive, right? Like our old brain believes that like we don't want to upset the apple cart, we don't want to cause friction within the family, and so we don't want to do anything that's gonna upset that, and so we just stay stuck in our same patterns. And I'm grateful enough to have a lot of stuff not go so well in my life to realize that like that mode of operation wasn't going to work. And I think, unfortunately, right, it takes oftentimes for people something to sort of blow up in your life for you to go, okay, that didn't work. I guess I could attempt an alternate route here.
Well, yeah, that's because discomfort is a great motivator, and so
yep.
It's when we get in that super discomfortable space, we finally cause for action, or pick up a substance for abusing purposes, to disassociate.
Yeah, to numb the discomfort.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
That's
go ahead, Darren.
Hey, Ryan. That comment right there, Dustin, is a great segue into a little bit of a, I'll say insight from last week that I had. I was talking to Ryan a little bit on via email. I mentioned that I had went back and watched our live from last week, and the way there was ways that I knew that I thought I knew that I had shown up in that live broadcast last week, and upon watching it, I found out that it was actually came across much different, at least in my observation after the fact, than I thought I was being during it. And it leads back to what you just talked about, the substance I guess crutch, for lack of a better word right now in my head. And I had smoked a little bit before that, and I also had a drink, and this cup right here, it has water in it tonight, but it didn't last week, and I was like, I looked intoxicated or impaired, and it's because I was. And and then to tie into what Tanner was talking about, I mean, it's like even without really thinking about it, I went to those things because I was nervous about it. That it was my first time ever being on Facebook Live, actually. I'm not going to use that as an excuse, though. It's just that's what happened last week. And but the cool thing is there's a lot of value that's come out of that for me, in that it's like this hiding that I was doing last week behind that was it was important for me to see that, and it was not I wasn't hiding as much as I thought. The cloak that I thought I had on was not there. So it's like,
we saw you.
What's that?
We saw you anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's true. And at the same time, like, there was a lot of things that I wanted to say or thoughts that I wanted to portray that didn't come out the way I thought they did, or that I wanted them to. So it's like, you know, I don't know where this will take us tonight, but that's just something that I guess it's a little bit of a confessional. And at the same time,
no, I think it's perfect.
You know, a notice for me that I think other people will, you know, they can draw from too, that, you know, even when we think we're hiding behind those things, we're really not. We're really not. And if we want our true selves to come through, the best way is to do what we, you know, to come from the center of ourselves and from our heart, and just let it out. That's all that it takes. So anyway, I feel better now.
Nice. Thank you for that.
I appreciate you. I think it's
well, I think it's great the way that you're approaching it, and it's kind of the same way that I would recommend approaching the pot roast scenario, the same way that you've approached your notice, and you approach it with compassion and awareness, and you held space for all of that to take place all at once while you synergize a result. And I think that you did that in your own mind, but I think we can also do that within the minds of two people just by communicating. And I think compassionately you can approach someone and be like, I think that we should talk about this pot roast thing. And I think that there's a loving conversation that we can have with ourselves in the situation of realizing it, but cutting the ends off the pot roast for no reason. We can have a loving conversation with ourselves, and we can also have a loving conversation with the person that taught us that. And if you do it, if you come from the right place, like if you have the right level of understanding of the situation, you can speak from such a loving, authentic place where even if it doesn't change the person that you're saying it to, they'll hear you. And that in itself can change a relationship. And this is like firsthand experience that I have with my father, and like some real super cool work that we've been doing in the last year between us. And we've had like really cool feedback from our people around us being like, oh yeah, you guys' relationship is like way better, and incredible feedback to hear when both of us have been contributing to that. So I think it's been through that very simple tool of compassion. How can I look at this situation with a compassionate filter and manifest that truth in my mind and synergize it with what I know? And it's pretty easy from there, at least in my experience.
And I think like literally the reason Dustin and I started doing this every week is so we could back each other up on those exact things. So what an amazing way to show up last week so that you could come here this week and then offer that admission and then do it in front of everybody who's watching, like the one or two people that watch this show. You know? And then but what a wonderful way to offer that admission here and then to there, and then however many people watch this is like, oh man, the guy just came in and just totally let it be. And we could see you get a little bit emotional, and it was totally cool, and there's no judgment, and it's just love. And it's like, and now we can go back to, let's like go eat some pot roast. And one of the things that I really want people to notice that watch this is that this is a way that life can be. It doesn't have to be this bucket load of judgment and denial. And Darren was like, hey man, like I noticed something during the week, or I rewatched the video and I noticed something, and I said, hold on to it. Let's talk about it in live, because it's more powerful that way. I think the more we share this stuff with, the more we're real about that. Like Dustin is like working on stuff with his dad. I'm 39, I'll be 40 in April. And I've never had the open and real conversations that I've had with my mom within this last year. It just doesn't happen. And I'm like, my son's 17 and we struggle to have open conversations, and it's challenging. And it's like, at the end of my conversation with my son, I was like, look, man, I'm 39 years old and I'm just now able to have like a real conversation with my mom. And it's still hard for me to take the things that she's telling me and like take them on board, because I still have this energy about my parents being awful leaders, when it's not true. It's just that it's a generational gap. They've been chopping pot roast off, and maybe I noticed that they were doing that, and I thought that it was weird, and I was attempting to try to bring it up. They're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you'll understand, blah blah blah. And then those tiny little words, those things that just get installed, just like Tanner's saying about these things that program us, they're so deeply ingrained sometimes. And something as little as chopping the pot roast, the ends of the pot roast off, like imagine, I mean, shit, like what I mean, I don't know if the story was true, but imagine like 4 generations later when you're like, what the fuck? I've been
We wasted thousands of pounds of meat. What the
thousands
fuck?
of pounds of meat. Like, yeah, it's funny.
The metaphor is true.
Yeah.
The details, the actors in the story may have been slightly
They're different. No, it's perfect. It's good. And so now we know Tanner's a liar too, and we can work on that. No, so it's
or
just
a great storyteller.
storytelling.
Yeah, a great storyteller. No, it's perfect. Perfect.
You prefaced it with, I have a story for you, so
Mm-hmm.
he told us what he's doing.
Yeah, you asked for a story, dude. I've been planning this all week, but it's funny though. So Darren said, "Hey, you want to join us next week? Watch the end of this video, and you'll understand why." And so I was like watching the video, and you guys are talking about Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff, and I was like, "Wait a minute, like, am I gonna have to admit some shit when I get on here, right?" So I was like, and I realized that you just wanted to see about 4 people getting on here. However, I know what you're talking about, Darren, and I know, Dustin, you had shared not getting high every day, right, a while back, and I was sort of like, it's this group of guys that helps keep me honest, and I know, like, if I get all smoked up, like getting on live video, it feels like to sort of calm the nerves, right? It's a reaction, and then I've done it enough times that I've found out that it has the opposite effect, because you're like, oh wait, right, like extreme paranoia. And I don't know. It's an interesting thing, since we're sort of on that topic, right? Where I do find that a lot of my work has been in not using substance as a crutch, and at the same point, I'm also want to be open and sort of accepting of, like, you can smoke a joint or have a drink and it not have to be a crutch. And I'm actually I'm like in that zone now of sort of like, I don't want to overanalyze every use of everything. And at the same point, I think deep down in my core, I know, right? I know the difference between a crutch and a whatever social lubricant we'll call it. But it's such an interesting topic, that you brought that up, Darren. I was like, wait a minute, I'm gonna be in a group of guys that are radically honest. Shit's gonna get real, and so yeah, I mean, one, I'm stoked we're still talking about pot roast. Two, I appreciate the admission, Darren, that I really was like, this is gonna come out one way or the other, like being with you guys, which I think is great.
Well, there's more to it too. So like tonight I had an opportunity to choose different, right? So I was just in a very observatory mode, very objective, large view down on myself, not being down on myself, but just looking at the big picture, what's going on in my head, right? And it was funny, like it came up several times in my mind, well, maybe just a little, or something, and then, well, I could just get a little high, and then I can tell them this story, and I can I'll just fib about it a little bit or whatever. Like, these are the things that went through my head, and I'm like, no, this is not where I'm going. So like, okay, well, what am I going to do? That was what became the question, because I had, an hour to kill before before we started tonight. And what I did was I connected with my breath. I did a few rounds of breathing, conscious breathing. For those that don't know, I don't know how many people are listening, but and I took a cold shower.
10,000 people are watching right now.
Take cold showers.
Ow.
That's all you got to do. That's what I did tonight. I mean, because this is what I know works for me, and rather than going to something that I think I can fake my way into working, and I know really doesn't work, I chose to do that. And here I am, like sitting here, like I'm hot in a t-shirt in my house right now because my body's still generating heat from having taken a cold shower about 20 minutes ago or so. But I feel great, and I'm happy. I feel present, and yeah, that's the rest of it.
I read this book by Aubrey Marcus called Own the Day, Own Your Life.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about supplements, and he talks about all the stuff. He talks about nicotine, talks about alcohol, caffeine, coffee versus tea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he like owns Onnit, which is like a pretty big deal supplement company. And he's like talking about the stuff. He's like, when I'm on this freaking magnesium, I feel like, "Rah!" And he's all hooyah, and he's got a 6-pack abs, and he talks about him. He's a really up dude who's really down all at the same time. But he talks about it in his book. He's like, but every once in a while, I have to take a month off of everything just to check in to be sure that I'm not full of shit. And I love what Tanner says, like deep down, like we know, oh, deep down, I know this isn't a crutch. I know this isn't a crutch. But sometimes that I know this isn't a crutch just becomes something we say, and it just becomes us, like even just, oh, this isn't a crutch. I'm good. I'm totally good. I know I'm good. But then it's healthy to even challenge yourself when you're 100% sure you're not lying to yourself, and you're like, oh man, it's like you don't know what you don't know, or don't know what you know, and all that stuff. And so I just think that's a really interesting thing, because he's like on that stuff. He's like once a year, he's like, they do Sober October. They get off of everything. And so he stops taking the supplements, and he stops doing everything. And then he like brings them back in a little bit at a time to be like, yeah, this stuff's really dope, And then when he talks about like coffee and tea, and he gets really nerdy about like when he drinks coffee and when he drinks tea, he's like, well, I drink tea in the afternoon because it's more about focus. I drink coffee in the morning because it's more of a mood booster. And then if you want this other thing, freaking da-da-da. And it's like, so it's just really interesting in how taking somebody else's word for one thing is one thing, but to really experiment with that stuff, both on and off, to see how it turns out. How do you feel? Like, do you feel better sober, or do you feel better last week when you're high? Because Dustin's come in here before hammered, and it was really fun. And so
well,
it's just,
I think it's the context, Ryan.
Mhm.
The context of for me last week was hiding, or settling nerves that I thought I needed to help settling. And for Dustin that other time, it was all about fun, and he was coming into it like, let's see how this goes. I'll drink some beer while we're doing this and see what happens. And that's a whole different context. I was definitely hiding.
Totally fair. I appreciate your presence today.
Yeah, on it too. He's on it.
Mm-hmm.
No pun intended.
Yes.
I actually do take some Onnit supplements.
Yeah, I have some of your old bottles. In fact,
yeah, you do.
I took one of those today, as a matter of fact.
Was that Alpha Brain?
No, it's
well, that's the bottle.
something else. Yeah, it's in the bottle. Some of it he's manufactured.
Oh, nice.
Or produced, I guess would be a
Cool.
better word. Produced.
Well, yeah, it's. I'll real quick. I'll just kind of explain. I'll go back because the story starts actually the beginning of my conscious life, or my earliest memories. I hated mushrooms my whole life. I'm 41 now. I just hated mushrooms. I don't know, it was a texture thing, like just this connotation of fungus or whatever. It was just not my thing. Don't want them on my pizza. Don't want them in the spaghetti. Like, keep them away from me. No thanks. Well, let's see. This last April, we moved into our new house, which I'm sitting in now, and we got new sod, right? And the sod these mushrooms are growing everywhere. And I'm like, I wonder what they are, if those are poisonous or whatever. So I started researching them, and I figured out, like, I identified the mushrooms as being edible. not psychoactive, but edible. And they're called like a lawnmower's mushroom, I believe. I don't remember the technical term, but they're just a small mushroom that typically grow in grass. And so I started picking these things, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna face this fear of mushrooms that I have, and I'm gonna like learn about mushrooms and how they grow. And like, so I dove head first into this whole mycology experiment. And I started, those particular mushrooms actually have ATP5 and some, and serotonin. So they're like mood leveling. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I could use some of that sometimes. So I just started eating mushrooms out of my yard, putting them in stuff we're cooking and everything. Well, then I decided I was going to figure out how to grow them. And actually, with two of the three of you guys, I had an experience before with taking magic mushrooms, and not a lot of experience, but just like a couple times in my whole life. And one of them was with Dustin and Tanner, actually.
Super fun.
But anyway, I figured out, like, I watched some YouTube videos and did all sorts of research, and I figured out how to grow mushrooms in my house. So I did just that, and I grew magic mushrooms called the golden teacher is what they're called. And it took me a lot of tries, and it was, I don't know, probably my third attempt when I actually got it figured out and actually grew mushrooms and was able to harvest them. Well, in the course of all this study of mushrooms, I learned about something called microdosing, which is it's done with more than just magic mushrooms. I'll stick to that. So psilocybin is the component or the ingredient in the magic mushrooms that's psychotropic, and it's being researched now that very minute levels of this substance can actually they can combat depression. They're mood enhancing. They're just are having a tendency to level people out at very microscopic doses. So this is like, I'm talking like 0.2 grams, 0.2 grams, which is like 200 milligrams of psilocybin, of actual dried mushroom powder. So the amount of psilocybin is even lower than that. But that's what Dustin's talking about. Is I sent him some so he could test them out too. I actually found that, you know, it does elevate my mood a little bit, but I don't really need it. So I feel pretty good generally anyway. So I haven't really been taking them that much. But sometimes if I want to like be on my A game for sure and like super focused for that day, and I noticed it only really lasts about 4 hours ish at the most. Mm-hmm. I'll take a microdose of psilocybin. It seems to help a little, but it's not. Again, I'm like, why am I taking it? Is it because I need a crutch, or am I enhancing myself? So that's a question I ask myself, and I'm not real sure yet exactly, but I will continue to experiment.
Is the difference anything more than context? Like, I'm asking that question like legitimately. Is the difference between it being a crutch, or I'm just taking a little bit, like, is it anything more than context? I'm just curious to kind of talk about that.
I think it's an internal dialogue, and it's who's making the decision. I know for me at least, like my mechanism is to like sort of hide behind my decisions, or decisions that I don't want to make more so. And so my pattern of behavior is to do that, is to like withdraw and then hide behind whatever that substance is and just always be in that state. And so I think that that's more or less what you have to look at, is what's the underlying operating system. What program is it? Is it on this side of this program or this side of the program? Which one is the one actually leading to the behavior? And whether you notice it instantly or you notice it over a period of time, you'll base that on results. So if it's always on this side of the scale, always kind of negatively impacting you, and you're not paying attention, eventually you'll start having consequences and results pile up. And on this side, if it's not having that effect on you, but will just go on into existence. So you have to definitely look inwards always, but look at results and see if it's being hindered by what's happening or not. And then from the other side is who's making the decision. Am I making this with a conscious and sound mind because I really want to, or is it a weak chicken exit from reality?
It's interesting too. It's interesting because it's extremely individualistic. It's like a person to person to person, and we make policy in this country. Like we cut the ends. I love that. I'm going to use this analogy till it's completely dead. Like just cutting the ends off of. You guys hear Charlie back there? Yeah, my daughter's like freaking having a party downstairs. So
your mic's too beast.
Like I know, man. No, I've got this freaking processor that's supposed to cut all this stuff out. So if you don't hear it, then it's working. So
It's working.
anyways, so it's just an interesting thing, like because we make massive amounts of policy in this country, like just based on the general thing of what they did if they tested 100 whoever people against for everybody else. And it's just, and I mean, like there's not a law that isn't made that wasn't made by a select few based on the experiences of a select few for the masses. And it's really, really, really interesting, the stuff that they do. And then there's some stuff that they make laws about that they have tons and tons of research about that they know is probably not great, but if it positively affects their quarterly report, they put it out anyways, and then they hide that evidence, and then they just publish the evidence of that select few. And so it's fascinating, and it's just like another metaphor for like how we're honest and how we're dishonest. And I think Dustin's like, checking the results, like what's the results, and I think even if your results, like what's the intention behind the results that you're checking? Like, are those in alignment? Because that can be, it's just like, depending on how you want to look at it and what lens you want to look at it through, like there's so many ways to justify and so many ways to condemn. And it's just a fascinating thing, and there's somebody out there who sees this video and be like, you shouldn't be microdosing, you're a terrible person. Like, and they think that you should burn. And then there's other people to be like, man, I'm on this stuff all the time and I'm freaking like party, like just crushing it all the time. And so it's just, I, the beholder, and the person speaking it, and blah, 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 and everything, and all the infinite shades of gray, like 2 weeks ago that we mentioned, from in between.
For me, I think just continuing to ask the question, keeps me on my toes. Like I can assure that it doesn't go down the hole that I don't want to if I'm asking a question and acting upon it. I think, what Dustin's talking about results. So that's what I did last week was, looking at that live feed again. Mm-hmm. The result was not what I wanted it to be. Whether you guys accepted me for whatever, like the part doesn't matter. It's what matters is my desire to be better and to improve, daily, or from minute to minute, moment to moment, all the time. That's why I did that. I mean, it was uncomfortable for me to watch that whole thing. And I was just like, So anyway, bigger and better.
What a lesson, though, right? I think that's the self-awareness is such a gift, right? To just like I feel like, and sometimes it's not until I'm baked out of my skull that I can really get out of my own skull, right? And sort of observe things. And so, I mean, I have my own justifications, I think that's the beauty, right? We sort of justify one way or the other, but I think I think Dustin put it great, right? It's ultimately the results in your life. And I know that I've found myself, judging actions of other people. And oftentimes that is the brightest light shined on the things in my life, right? That aren't necessarily going so well. And so I've used that as an opportunity to say, like, who am I to judge your actions and your behavior? Like, ultimately it's really binary, right? I love how we can get things down to binary switches in our life of like, are you happy or not? Are you achieving your results or not, right? And if the answer to a lot of those important questions are no, and there's some habits that could be changed to support that. Like, okay. I think what you said though, Ryan, like you've got to find different ways to get outside of even your own ecosystem, right? And back to the friggin' pot roast, like we're made that way. We create our own chamber and our own survival mechanisms, right? That it's oftentimes like you don't even know. And I think having a great group of people, right? A great group of friends, a great network, people that you can be honest with, to one, learn from, but two, also get feedback from, and like, no, like, am I really bullshitting myself here or not? And I can listen to somebody else's story. And even if you don't tell me that I'm full of shit, like what Darren just said clearly stirred something inside of me to go like, well, wait a minute, what can I take from that? So I love this conversation. I wasn't sure where we were going to go either, but the pot roast really set it up nicely, and I'm learning a ton from this.
I think
Dude, we never know where we're going.
I know, which is what I love.
Potentially, we love it. Go for it, Dustin.
Definitely the best place to start is nowhere, because then you could end up anywhere. Anyways, to talk about like this, what you're basically referencing is the ego, and you're using it as a tool instead of as a vice. So if you're using it as a vice, you're going to just do what you said and project that internal insecurity on someone else, and it's going to come out in a very volatile, ugly way. But you could turn that experience around as a human and be like, okay, this is an internal experience that I'm creating for myself because of something. So this is me using the ego as a tool. I think that about them because why? And that's why this metadata, what we were talking about earlier, we didn't actually use the term, but metadata is so important. So the why of the what is fundamental in any sort of learning experience. So if you do the metadata behind everything and look underneath the reasonings behind the pot roast and figure out those missing little details and reanalyze those details and consider what was going on in the situation and like really break it down over and over, we can use our ego as a homing beacon to help ourselves grow, which is super cool, because that's what it's really for, is to help us stay alive, which is responsibility number one. Responsibility number two is to help us grow so we can continue to stay alive and make more people. And that's the purpose of the ego. And when we let it do something else, it's a very poor leader of character and very poor leader of decision making. And if we use it as a tool instead of a guidance system, we're going to be way more effective, I think. And which is basically what we're talking about, and this what everybody's sort of approached in their own cool story, which is super great. I really have enjoyed this one a lot so far. But that's what you guys are all doing. You're using ego as a tool and as a feedback loop and as a mechanism to grow instead of as a homing beacon to bad decisions. Which is nice. I'm sure you do those too, but that's just not what you're talking about.
Yeah, I would sum up that distinction you're making in two contexts. Like, there's one context that most people are living in all the time. We all live in it most of the time, even when we are growth oriented, and that's the survival context versus growth or thriving context. So, like most things we do on a daily basis are based in survival, even if we don't think they are. They are. It goes deep, right? Like it's the primal part of our brain is keeping us alive, and that's what's running the show really behind the scenes. So, and then when we step outside of that and move into growth, like doing something tonight, I did something different. I chose to use the feedback that I chose to even receive, which was also growth oriented, and that's the major difference, I think, in context. There is it's just, are we consciously attempting to thrive in life, or are we just unconsciously surviving?
It's the funny thing, and then this is just to kind of throw like a wrench into the machine of your question, is are we never not either? So it's one of those things, because like Like I think the more we evolve
Yeah.
as humans, like the more our upper brain begins to function all this stuff. But it's just like it's like an upside down Ponzi scheme that just drops right back down into that monkey mind, like somewhere. It's all connected into there somehow. So I think about this sometimes and just be like, I'm totally growth today. I was like really on it. And then it's like, was I? Like I was just listening to this book about marketing today, and the guy's like, no matter what you're doing, we're always looking for a better way to hunt and gather, you know, and it's just like we're always looking for a better way. And so it's just like the man, everybody wants on the show today. So the dogs outside are barking at. So anyways, if you guys can't hear it, then sweet. So Tanner's like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I heard the dog that time.
Oh, cool.
Your mic's on point though.
Cool, man. I dig it. So, man, this has been a good one. Anybody got any save rounds or alibis left over? Anything else you guys want to talk about?
It's a rich episode, man. I appreciate you wanting to test out Zoom so I could fill another spot in here. That was a good call. No, I think it's great. I appreciate the conversation, and I think that last thing I'm still sort of reeling on what you just said, right? Of like we're both right all the time, surviving, thriving. It's sort of what you're focusing on, but the awareness of like what you're up to and what's important, I think is so fascinating to me. You shot a gun. You pointed.
No, I did. I love that point, and I think that may be the answer. Actually, is that and something I'd love to say is that I believe we're always making the best. We're always making the best choices possible in the moment, based off the experience that we have and the level of awareness we have for ourselves. And just like Tanner said earlier, the only way to grow that awareness is to sometimes be in it. You know, it's like, well, I have to go make this choice. And then I think the more aware than we are, the more that we can know whether we're growing or just surviving. Like, oh man, I'm totally in fight or flight right now. Let me do some breathing and kick out of it, and then bum. I mean, Darren, that's like kind of the context of his story earlier. Like he was in fight or flight. Maybe I should just have a little bit. And then he's like, no, I don't need to do that. Growth-oriented choice. Let me do some breaths. And then he shows up. And so I think that may be the distinction. But then it's like sometimes your awareness shuts off and you're like cooking the pot roast and it's like done. You serve it on the table and you're like going to throw some stuff away and you open the can and there's the two ends just sitting in the garbage can. You're like, I don't even remember cutting those off. So,
oh man.
Yeah. You don't like sometimes it just happens. And then you get to be like, oh, well, and then I think that's an example of like Darren's story bringing something up in Tanner, like, oh man, I must have to, like, I've got some questions to ask, you know, how did this happen? Like, I didn't even realize that. And so it's a really tricky magic that we're messing with right now. And I dig it. I appreciate you guys all showing up here tonight. And we will definitely have you guys back again for sure.
Yeah, man, that was super fun.
Good stuff.
Really glad that you guys came. I enjoyed Darren again, and Tanner, your contribution was perfect. The metaphor that you started us off with was a really nice bone to be on. I had something that I haven't wanted to say in closing, but I joked on that, lost it in that pun. Oh, nope, it's gone. I was going to say something. Nope, it's gone, which is perfect.
Well,
it wasn't meant for this episode.
Something I did want to mention tonight. I think the concept, Ryan, is catching on in the 4 squares. Interestingly enough, I had a notification on my Facebook not too long before we started. It was JP Sears. You guys know the JP, he does all the funny videos and stuff. The woke as AF guy.
He's the yoga. He's the yoga guy that frickin's always making fun of It's hilarious.
Purple shirt, man.
Yep. So he had a Zoom live feed on Facebook. That was the notification with 3 of his buddies, and they were talking just like this. They called it what did they call it? Misfit Monday. So it's catching on.
Our title evolves. So fuck their video. We have evolving title. Next week it's gonna be Misfit Weird Mondays. Take that, JP Sears.
next week is going to be the title of the show is going to be Authenticity is a Gift, and that's what I wanted to say earlier, is that authenticity is a gift, and when you give it in your present, it's such a present to everyone around you. And that's why one of the main reasons why Ryan and I wanted to record this show from the very beginning was because we felt that our conversations, had they been in earshot of other people, might have been present to them as well. And you guys have definitely contributed your authenticity today. That share, Darren, so amazing. Your story, Tanner, set the tone in such a cool way. So authenticity is a gift, and when you give it, it's a lot. And that's what this whole thing is about. So thanks for living up to all possible expectations.
All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. And if you guys have any questions on the Facebook feed, please drop them in here. If you have any questions from any of the four of us, I'm sure we're all open to receiving messages or friend requests from you right here on Facebook. And anything that you would like us to talk about on future episodes, we are going to continue this process through the holidays. And you may see Darren or Tanner or the both of them, like maybe we'll do like a New Year's Eve party, like on here or something, and we'll figure it out. And so, yeah, thanks for being here, guys, and we'll reach out to you guys soon for future stuff. Mahalo.
Thanks for the invite. See you guys.
Yeah, of course. Later.